Hey guys, welcome to Friday Night Bible Study through the letter to the Romans, verse by verse. And we are still in chapter 1. And Romans is one of the greatest treatments or teachings on salvation. And I think it's important that I kind of keep going over this because there are so many opinions on salvation. There are so many opinions, you could say, about salvation. And what is interesting is that um, that as plain as the topic, the subject of salvation is in scriptures, it's just amazing that there are so many different views on it. Now, the simple answer is people are just not reading the Bible, but they are conditioned from their theological or denominational viewpoint. And that's the sad thing. That's the simple explanation for it. See, when I get into debates, one of the things is that people will debate, they will try to counteract from their theological perspective. That's why usually I can win every debate, because most of the time people's starting point for their argument is their denomination and not scripture. And so and that's the same with the view. So, when you think about something like water baptism, that there a few denominations that teach that you have to be baptized in water in Jesus' name in order to be saved. So the starting point for their argument, the starting point from their point of view, is this is what we have been taught. Now, they will, of course, tell you about different scriptures, not many, but they are based that argument solely on a few verses of scriptures. Most notably, First Peter, or the Second Peter, one of the two, where it says, and now baptism does now save us. And if they see right there, it plainly states that. Now, if you stop and think about what they're saying now, and I'm saying this in light of, we're going to have 8 chapters where Paul is breaking down salvation. Think about 8 chapters. And none of the people who make their arguments will cite verses from these 8 chapters. I would say except for Romans 6. And where Paul talks about baptism, okay? But and then again, of course, we'll get to that. But the idea of that, Paul talking about being baptized into the death of Christ, not water. So it's always amazing. So when I say that Paul's treatment on salvation here, that out of all what we need to, you got the different letters that specifically as the main topic talk about salvation. The main topic that talks about salvation. And it is amazing that you have people that will not study that. So anyway, we are. And the idea is that, so as we're systematically going through, as Paul is systematically laying out, we're at the point we're talking about the depravity of man. And why man is depraved. And that's important. Why is man depraved? How bad can bad get? How bad is, um, 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 when we talk about us, why do we need to be saved? Now, this is another thing, is that, see, people keep thinking that salvation is something that is of a reform nature, meaning this. People think, and this is, of course, different denominations, most Christianity teach, practice, believes that you have to do something in order to be saved. You have to do some form of work. You have to do something in order to earn your way to heaven. So this is why, again, as I'm going through this is important to understand how scriptures debunks that notion. And yet, as I said, and by the way, it's for us to work salvation. I think God in his wisdom gave us, he gave us the teachings about salvation. He gave us um, what we needed to know about salvation. That's, and again, and he laid it out to the point of understanding that salvation comes by grace and not by works, because we keep hearing this over and over again. We're going to hear this throughout this. All right. But first, we're talking about, and last time we were talking about why just doing good deeds will never be good enough. But we're at the point where Paul is talking about the different sins. Let me just go there, because, well, let me just say this, and because I'm thinking about this, if it seems like I'm kind of stumbling around, because I don't want to get into a deep debate on the politics of homosexuality. That has been the problem, the sad thing that our conservative Christians have, I think, butchered. That in their political and social cause, they've made, for one talking point, homosexuality the focus point, that and abortion. And they've ignored others. And if you ever ask, what, you ever ask what is their purpose? Like, now, if you think about just what you hear with conservatives, I mean, their support for Trump, their support for Charlie Kirk. What is the end goal for that? See, what is the end goal for that? It's not the gospel. It's not the cause of Christ. There's another cause. I'm not going to get into that because I'm so tempted to get into it. I'm not going to get into that. But suffice to say, what Paul is talking about is, he's talking about I'll get it right. Here we go. What Paul is talking about is really laying out the case for the depravity of man. He wasn't just talking about homosexuality. Now, I did say this. I did get into this. Let me come out because I did get into this. And that is, if you wanted to get into the discussion, the so, like I say, I'm really, I don't want to get too deep into this, but here's where we intersect here in terms of what scripture actually teaches. If I was to get into a discussion with a LGBT member, okay, because now it is a excuse me, it is a kind of it's an argument to where people will say, Is God against homosexuality? Is God against the LGBT? Is God against same-sex marriage? The answer is yeah. That's not what he created. I'm just careful because I don't want to get into the idea that that's not my fight socially, but spiritually, yeah, just like God is against adultery, God is against any kind of sin. That's why I want to keep the debate or the argument on. All right. So when you think about the just from a biological standpoint, you understand. Remember, Paul starts off by saying God's creation is clearly defined. The visible attributes of his nature are clearly defined in what he created. So when you look at, and I say this even from a scientific perspective, that from a scientific perspective, the Bible is not a scientific book. And I think one of the dangers is trying to read Genesis 1 and 2 as a scientific book as far as a declaration of faith. See, the Bible is a book of faith. I believe the Bible. I believe the claims of the Bible. Now, when you look at, if you try to, and here's the fight where people have tried to put the Bible in a scientific classroom setting. That's always a mistake because it's not. There's no scientific evidence that proves God. There's no scientific evidence that proves that God created the earth. That shouldn't be the approach. When you listen to the claims of science that now says, they have got some momentum, however, they will say, well, like a lot of times the atheists will say, it's not that we will say, and I think they when the atheists say, I'm an atheist, I don't believe in God because I don't see the evidence of God. Well, I would dispute that because I think it's more than that. I think it's not that there's evidence or not evidence. As a scientist, how could you look at the creation and then say, well, definitely there is no such thing as God who could have created that. That's just, again, to me, when you see that declaration, and then when you look at their arguments for science, you start with the Big Bang to say from nothing, and I know they've kind of revised that, but you have to start from nothing. You have to start from, again, I don't know. So were the elements, right, all the materials for combustion that were already there to start the Big Bang, where did they come from? Now, they've heard these arguments. If you say just out of nothing, why? In the vast nothingness of nothing, meaning in other words, they even acknowledge that the outside of the universe, so you got the expansion of the universe. Outside of the universe, it has to be nothing. At least they assume, right? To me, if you believe in God, the universe could be like a small model in the room. Like if I had this room that you see around here, and I had in the center of this room a table with a model town covered over. Okay, But we don't know. But in other words, so if you say from a scientific standpoint that God didn't create this, okay, so you asked out God, now you have to come out with leaps of faith in your thought. First and foremost, the materials of combustions that caused this. Remember, the universe, the explosions that eventually resulted in hundreds of billions of stars and star systems, one of which is our own. So you said, well, so you initially start with an explosion that you can't explain. Even the logic of how, the logic of how, when you got an explosion, now there's a couple of things I want you to see here. The logical explosion that in every other explosion that we can hypothesize from, you never see order that comes from that explosion. And yet they want to tell us from that one single explosion, an entire universe that's expanding. So the universe exploded, created the universe itself, and then within the universe, all these different stars, the universe itself is expanding. So the explosion created the expansion of the universe, and then now it's exploding out. Right? That's a leap of faith to say that this all happened because of natural processes. So now within this expansion of space, 14 billion years, as they calculated, you know, all these different star systems that created order. Why? What is the order? You got these galaxies where they all got stuff orbiting, just going around, orbiting. Then our own star system is an orbit. Okay. Then you get to the fact that all of a sudden you give us some billions of years, it cools down, and all of a sudden now only one star system now that has this blue ball in it called Earth. The blue ball called Earth. Now watch this, because again, this is just kind of amazing. So the blue ball is called Earth. So now the blue ball is called Earth. And so with the blue ball that's called Earth. Now get this. So the blue ball, Earth, and then you have what's called an amoeba, a microbe, right? A microbe. Let me see if I have this. Because I'm going over this because of, let's see here. That's what they say, a microbe. This is where life came from. Okay? So understand, this is what they say life came from. That's what life. Now, from this, okay, however it may look, but look at this. No eyes, no nose, no sex drive, no genital. This is what human comes from, okay? That's what they say humans come from. See? And now give it another 4 billion years, and then it produced us. Now think about that. You give it another billion years, and then that produced this, us. All right. They would rather believe that than to say God created that, designed it. Out of all the different species, they would rather say all of that. That's why, again, it makes no sense to, as the Bible tells us, we know why that they believe that way. And I'm going to say this, that belief, they make it sound convincing, but you got to kind of really listen to say, so basically, if you give it enough time, so they say 14 billion years, I say give it 100 trillion years, and you still wouldn't come out with the logic of, from that microbe, why would it have two eyes, a nose, a mouth, a tongue, two hands, feet, well, all the stuff that we need, mankind needs to walk. Then you got at the same in the same condition, atmospheric conditions, you got four-legged. Why? Why different? Why is man? Why is man number one? The number one creature on earth. There's animals that are certainly more powerful than man. Most probably mammals are more powerful than man. So why don't they rule? Why don't they have the mental capability? Now, here's what I'm saying all that because there's not one scientific proof that contradicts the Bible's claims. When it says in Genesis 1, God created the heavens and the earth. There's nothing logically that says that God didn't do this. So their rejection, okay, their rejection, okay. Now, remember we said, look at here, for the wrath of God is revealed from heaven against all ungodliness and unrighteousness of people who by their unrighteousness suppress the truth. So this is what's going on right here. That logically speaking, and they will tell you they can't explain why natural selection chose for us to have two eyes instead of an eye will do. Why natural selection decided, okay, well, I need teeth. They would say, oh, all of a sudden natural selection said, well, okay, if you don't have teeth, then you can't chew food, right? So why do I need food? Why? And then wait a minute. So then if I'm eating food, why do I need a digestive system in order to digest the food? Okay. So, let me go down because again, I said all of that because when we talk about the issue of homosexuality, that let me go back and read. Verse 19, since what can be known about God is evident among them because God has shown it to them, for his invisible attribute, that is, his eternal power and divine nature, having clearly seen since the creation of the world, being understood through what he has made. And then he says, as a result, people are without excuse. Now, so if you look at this, the logic, and to me, this is when it comes to religion, scientists devoid themselves of the logic of saying that God created this or something. And they would rather say natural processes created this, that natural processes just over time had to form teeth, had to form a digestive system, right? It had to. They had to say, well, it makes sense that we have, the digestive system where we eat food through the mouth and eliminate it through, the behind. Natural processes, natural selection did that. Natural selection. Then wait a minute, why do we have to have the sexual inclinations that we have? I mean, the desires. Why in the heck do we even need? Why did natural selection says you need genitals? Why was there a male or a female? So, all right. So, what I want to do, where did I leave off at? Let's go back down here. So, verse 26 says, this is why God delivered them over for degrading passions, for even their females exchange natural sexual relations for unnatural ones. And the male, in the same way, also left the natural relations with females and were inflamed in their lust for one another, male committing shameless acts with males and receiving in their own persons the appropriate penalty for their error. Now, again, you could clearly see the difference in, notice what he says, the natural relations. That you have a male and you have a female, they're the natural relation with that. So what would be unnatural would be same-sex marriage. What would be unnatural is that, okay, let's bestiality. So socially, what has been a smart tactic, a successful tactic, is they have brought same-sex marriage on the same level as the natural relations. And of course, think about this, they would even go further if they could, and they are trying with trans. So you got such issues now that a male can say, I'm a female, now put me in the female category of sports. That kind of nonsense. And then there's winning and say, oh, he won. you know. Um, my granddaughter is a wrestler, and she ended up she usually wins her matches, but then all of a sudden she had to wrestle against a male. They don't call him male, so I call it, and of course she lost. And but that's the kind of nonsense that you have there. But this is why he is saying this. This is the nonsense that you go from they exchange the natural sexual relations for unnatural ones. So now, as Christians, we're going to have to wrestle with the fact of speaking this truth is going to cost you. If you want to work in the film industry, Hollywood, whatever, making this stand is going to cost you. And even in certain work places, they want to, we have to deal with what they call it, gender neutral facilities, pronouns, and all of that. And here's my thing about this too. Personally, I don't look. If a man wants to be called a woman, if Dan wants to be called Diana, okay, Diana, no problem. That doesn't okay. But now, if you ask me, and you want to have a discussion about the truth of it, you may get your feelings hurt because it is an unnatural. So he says, the males in the same way also left the natural relations with the females and were inflamed in their lust for one another. So you clearly Paul talking about homosexuality and the lesbianism. Then he says, male committing shameless acts with males and receiving in their own persons the appropriate penalty of their error. So Paul doesn't labor on this, but this is clearly Paul clearly stating that the homosexual act is unnatural. Now, one could also make the argument about other deviant sexual acts. Paul just not doing it here. There is a story in the book of Judges. So you have two stories in the Old Testament. One is in Genesis, obviously the most popular story about Sodom and Gomorrah. And, you have the story about Lot, who was Abraham's nephew. He ends up living in Sodom and Gomorrah, which was a prosperous city at the time, but an exceedingly immoral city, to the point that God says, I'm going to destroy this city. Now, again, unfortunately, people have made the term Sodom, as, strictly, in other words, why God was judging them was strictly because of homosexuality. No, homosexuality was a part of it. And that's not why even God said that he was destroying the city. He said he was destroying the city because they were extremely wicked. Okay, so they begin their prosperity is what was the downfall. They became extremely wicked because of that. But so when God sent the angels, they show up at Lot's house. They show up at actually the city square, and Lot sees them and says, "Okay, man, these guys are going to grab you up," not realizing that they're angels. He brings them home, and next thing you know, all the men of the city, they come, they surround Lot's house and says, "Bring those men out so we can have sex with them." And Lot pleaded with them and says, "Oh my God, look here, I got virgin daughters. Take them." I'll show you. It shows you the depravity. This is the point. Show you the depravity. They go, "No." So then the angels came out, smite them with blindness, and said, "Okay, we got to go." Not because we're rushing out of them, but it's God is going to get ready to destroy the city. Okay, so that's one of the most famous things that people use against homosexuality. The word Sodom, even now in our laws, sodomy laws is from the name title of the city Sodom. Okay, now the idea was that the city was more wicked than just homosexuality, just the depraved, that you had the men that were going to come out and they were going to have sex with the angels. Okay, truth of the matter is that they were so deprived they would have had sex with anything. There was all kinds of deviant acts going on in Sodom and Gomorrah. Now, there's another story in the book of Judges. I think it's around chapter 21, where this priest, and again, the idea of the story was to show the depravity. So there was this, there was this city, there was this priest, and again, I think it was a priest, and he had a concubine. The concubine ran away from him, and the priest went after the concubine. And when the priest she went home, she ran to her father's house, and then he shows up, and then the father was just kind of like, again, the whole point of the story is to show you how depraved they were, how bad things had gotten. So instead of like, "Hey man, you've been abusing my daughter," or something like that, he was overjoyed, and he entertained the guy. He was very hospitable to the guy. And then all of a sudden he said, "Okay." They were getting ready to leave. And the guy said, "No, no, 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 stay, stay, stay." So he convinced them to stay one night. And then I think he was going to convince them to stay a second night. And I think the third night, so one of the two, the third night, they kept lingering, lingering. "Don't go, don't go. Hey, have some lunch, don't go." And then finally the guy said, "We're leaving." Okay, the guy, "We're leaving." So he got the concubine, him, said, "We're leaving." But because of the lateness of the day and nightfall, they didn't want to travel at night. He says, "You know what? There was one city." They said, "You know what? We don't know about this city. Let's go to a Benjamite city." Well, that turned out to be a bad choice, because that night, the guy that, again, did the same thing with Sodom and Gomorrah, he saw him and said, "Hey man, come stay in my house, look." But that night, the men of the city came to surround him. "Hey, bring these people out so we can have sex with them." The guy tried to plead with him, and finally the other guy came and brought his concubine out and threw her out. And then the men of the city abused her all night. Abused her all night. And in the morning, she crawled to the threshold of the door and collapsed and died. The man came up, looked at her and said, "Get up, get up." She was dead. So he put her on the horse, took her home, chopped her up into 12 pieces, and then sent her to all the tribes of Israel. And they ended up having war against her, and they wiped out the Benjamite, and it was a bad thing. Now, that again, it shows you the depravity. That story doesn't get a lot of talk for some reason, as opposed to Sodom and Gomorrah. One one doesn't fit the narrative, because here the guys raped a woman and then actually killed her. The other two, they attempted to rape angels, and well, angels are stronger. But the idea, again, see, it's the depravity here. So yes, why Paul is making the point here of unnatural sexual relations. If you look at God from the standpoint of what is the um um what am I saying? If you look at what is the natural, what I'm trying to say here, if you look at it from a sinful standpoint, okay, that's what I want to look at. From a sinful standpoint, all sin, all fornication is sin. Which brings us then to verse 28 says, and because this they did not think it worthwhile to acknowledge God, God delivered them over to a worthless mind to do what is morally wrong. Now, this word worthless mind, okay, let me do this here. Let me do this. I'm going to show you all the difference here. And let me do this. King James Version. Oh, okay, I'll do the King James Version. And this is the old one. Do I want this one? Gosh, I don't read this one very well. Okay, let's say, look at verse 28 here. Okay, this is, because I think the New King James will say the same thing. I want to read this verse. This is the King James. And by the way, I'm using the Holman Christian Standard. I can tell you, like I say, I've read this, ever since I was, saved. And I think I read it, for almost 20 years. I can tell you right now. That's why every now and then, if you hear me kind of talking, this old King James may come out. I may, ye, and I mean, oh, I mean you. But anyway, I want to read this because I want to show you how it kind of reads in this translation. It says, and even if they did not like to retain God in their knowledge, God gave them over to a reprobate mind to do those things which are not convenient. All right, so here it is in the Holman Christian Standard Translation. Okay, and because they did not think it worthwhile to acknowledge God, God delivered them over to a worthless mind to do what is morally wrong. A worthless mind. So I'm going to look at it just from a couple of other translations. Then I want to get into the word reprobate. Okay. Because worthless and, all right, let's look at this here. Let me see what this one says. Yes. So the American Standard says, and even if they refused to have God in their knowledge, God gave them up to a reprobate mind. Okay. A reprobate mind. We saw the King James. I'm gonna look to see what the Good News Translation says. This one says, and because they didn't, what translation am I reading? I think it's the Good News Translation. It says, because they refused to keep in mind the true knowledge about God, He has given them over to corrupt minds. Now some of these I'm just kind of reading through, and I'm going to tell you why I think reprobate is the better word, even though I read from the Christian Standard Okay. I think reprobate is the better word. I'm going to do just one more. Just one more. We saw the King James. King James. Which one do I want here? Oh. Wait a minute, where's the EV? That's what I want to see here before I come over. Right here, the English Standard. Let's see what they say. All right. The English Standard, which is the good translation, look at verse 28. It says, and since they did not see fit to acknowledge God, God gave them up to the base mind to do what is not to be done. All right. All right. Now, the reason why I wanted to go through that is the word reprobate, and I think the word reprobate itself, and this word here, how they translate it in the Holman Christian Standard and some of the other ones, when he says worthless mind. And that could fit, but here was the word, you realize that the reprobate, because here's the meaning of the term reprobate. So the idea of reprobate is, now I used to think that people, and there were people out of ignorance thought that it meant that when they said reprobate, that God had given you over to a kind of insane mind. I actually heard people say that. And that's not what it means. What it means is that when you get to this point here, that they keep rejecting God, they keep refusing God, then God turns them over to a reprobate, or it's like reject. Now, when he says worthless, or you could say, what's the word I'm looking for too? It's, put it like this. It's like if a manufacturer come up with, let's say, a chair design, just for example, a chair design, and in their mind that says, well, this chair is going to be able to hold 5,000 pounds. Okay, and let's say while rolling on wheels and blah 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 blah. Okay, it's gonna do all that kind of stuff. Okay, so the manufacturer will come up with a design, they will come up with specs, and then they will first present a test model. So how do they test it? Here's the chair, and then they will load it with 5,000 pounds. Let's say 5,000 pounds, and then boom, it crushes. They do it again, 5,000 pounds. They crush it. They try it again. And after so many tries, they're going to say, well, this chair is just not working. It's not. So after that, they're going to say, we need to come up with a different plan. We need to come up with, they will reject it. They will say, okay, they will stamp reprobate on it, meaning it fails the test. In other words, this cannot be salvaged. It's just not working. It fails the test. So that's the idea of the word reprobate. So when God is saying, like, these people here, no matter how you present the gospel, the truth of the gospel, they keep rejecting it in favor of their sin nature. Finally, God says they failed the test. God turns them over. God's going to let them you're a reprobate. So that's what the idea is, that you have failed the test. You have failed, and there's no sense in continuing to say, let's reach out to you or to try to save you, because you keep rejecting the truth in favor of your sin nature. That's the idea of reprobate. And this is what he's saying right here, is that a person can get to a point that they will stamp reprobate. A lot of people today are in that status, that you would say, a reprobate. Now let me just say this: I don't think I'm qualified to do that, stamp reprobate. God will. But you can tell that a person that continually rejects the truth, and then it'll get to a point that their mind is unchangeable. Boom, you stamp. Just like the original test chair. We thought the design could work. We thought the design could hold 5,000 pounds. But no matter how different versions we tried, it kept crushing, it kept failing the test. So finally, they will say, scrap that design. We're going to move on. Scrap that design. That's the same thing. So the reprobate mind, after so long, God says, a reprobate, and then he leaves them to their sin, to their destruction. All right, guys, we're going to pick this up next Friday. We're going to continue to go on because this is all, again, a kind of a setup to understanding the depravity of man. See, understanding, one, why man needs to be saved, but it also understanding why men are condemned. Okay? All right, guys, don't forget to like and share this video and subscribe to BP the Bible Perspective. And as always, if you have a thought or comment, add it to the comment section below. All comments are welcome, and I will see you next Friday.